For now, Paul Manafort is going to be in jail. He was led out of the courtroom by the U.S. Marshals. They came back into the courtroom and gave his wife his wallet, his personal possessions, and now he's going to be sitting in jail at least until he goes on trial here in Washington. The government made the case, John, that they said, quote, Manafort is a danger to the community. They said that he was carrying out a sustained campaign over 5 weeks to try to coach witnesses, to try to mold witnesses, telling them certain things that he was charged with were essentially not true. The defense attorneys argued strongly. They said that revoking bail was a very harsh penalty. They said that Manafort was really reaching out to people that he had no idea were going to be witnesses. They argued that the solution was for the judge and for the government to say exactly who were witnesses and who Manafort was not supposed to be in touch with. It turns out that one of the witnesses that Paul Manafort was talking to in the last few months, he came forward to the government, to the FBI, and said that what he felt was being done was to encourage perjury and to encourage lying to the government, and that's why the judge took the action that she did today, John.
A remarkable step. Evan Perez outside of the courtroom. Let's get some more now from our crime and justice reporter, Shimon Prokopecz. Shimon, this is a hardball tactic by the special counsel, a dramatic move to put Paul Manafort in jail while awaiting trial. What else do we know?
Yeah, it is a dramatic move, certainly. And, you know, we've been talking about this now for months, of whether or not the continued pressure on Paul Manafort by these new charges, by other charges, new indictments. How many times have we, stood here and talked about new indictments and new charges? And, you know, in the end, you know, everything that we've been told is that there is a lot of pressure on Paul Manafort to cooperate with investigators. Certainly, sources we've talked to all seem to indicate that there is something that the government needs from Paul Manafort and wants him to cooperate. And it will be interesting to see, you know, if this is finally the breaking point for Paul Manafort, because really this trial that's supposed to begin in September could take a really long time, John. You know, we're talking months perhaps. This is not an easy case. It's pretty complicated. It's a white collar with crime. There's all sorts of financial investigations that went on here, all sorts of different witnesses that will need to come before the court. It's a really strong case for the government, but it will take some time. So it could be months before Paul Manafort even has any opportunity to be freed. You know, it will be ultimately, if he's found not guilty in his trials, that he would be freed. But this will be key here now, is does this now break Paul Manafort?
That's an excellent question. Shimon, if you get any new reporting, come back to us throughout the hour. With me in studio here to share their reporting and their insights, Karin Demerjian with The Washington Post, CNN's Jeff Zeleny, CNN's Phil Mattingly, and Shan Wu, our CNN legal analyst and a former federal prosecutor. Shan, let me begin with you. How extraordinary is this for the government to say, we need to put this person back in jail, put this person in jail awaiting trial because, according to the government, they say it was a 5-week-long, detailed, methodical effort using encrypted apps, text messages, and other efforts to essentially tamper with witnesses?
It's very unusual, particularly in a white-collar case of this nature. And I think the judge struggled a great deal with that decision. I've been in front of that judge, of course, when I represented Rick Gates. And I think it was a hard decision for her, but it was a big problem for Manafort that he was actually indicted on the charge. It would be one thing if they were just making the arguments, but the indictment, I think, really tipped the scales.
And so let's look at the charges. There are 24 total counts now against Paul Manafort. Conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, failing to file the right documents about foreign representation, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, bank fraud. You see all the charges there. To be clear, not one of those charges has anything to do with the 2016 Trump campaign. But he was the chairman of the Trump campaign. In the latest indictment, they bring in a Manafort business associate who is known to have ties, prosecutors say, to Russian intelligence. Bob Mueller doesn't speak publicly. To stay in the legal environment for a minute, what is Bob Mueller saying, A, by bringing the new charges, and then by being aggressive and saying Paul Manafort's going to jail? What is he saying about the broader case?
What he's saying about the broader case is that we are leaving no stone unturned, that he's taking a very hard line approach. This has been a very aggressive prosecution, and he's continuing to toe that line.
he continuing to toe that line. And let's listen. This is the President of the United States this morning, speaking in a different context. But remember, the President spoke today. We have to consider the moment. We're going to go through this throughout the hour. This is on the question of Bob Mueller, the day after the Department of Justice Inspector General released a report about the Clinton email investigation. Yes, it was harshly critical of FBI conduct. It has nothing to do with the substance of the Russia meddling investigation. Some of the players involved have been involved in both. Their conduct has been questioned. Nothing to do with the substance, though, in the IG report, and yet the President of the United States says this about the special counsel.
Are you thinking of
No, but I
Mueller?
think that whole investigation now is look, the problem with the Mueller investigation is everybody's got massive conflicts. You have Weissman, who was at Hillary Clinton's funeral, meaning her party that turned into a funeral. And they were screaming and crying. They were going crazy. How can you have people like this? So you have, I call them the 13 angry Democrats. You have a tremendous animosity. I think that the Mueller investigation has been totally discredited.
To the President's point there, I think the Mueller investigation has been totally discredited. The President has shaped public opinion, especially among Republicans, about Bob Mueller. But every time Bob Mueller's investigation has faced a test in court, where people have questioned the integrity of his prosecutors, questioned whether he's outside of his mandate, including today, when Paul Manafort goes to jail, in court, Bob Mueller's winning.
Bob Mueller has not, in any formal capacity, earned any of the bad light, bad press that has actually fallen on a lot of different people that are either involved in the FBI or in other areas of the probe that he's looking at. What a lot of people in the GOP have been trying to do since yesterday is kind of draw this line. The IG report condemned a lot of individuals. It didn't condemn anything about the investigation as being politically biased. But a lot of Republicans have tried to say, well, if you have bad seeds, the whole garden is ruined, basically. And that is what the President is picking up on. Now, Democrats are pushing back, saying, look, Mueller, the second that he knew about people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, got rid of them, that they didn't stay on his team. He's managed to keep himself inoculated and done the right thing when he's been made aware of these people that were not acting the way they should have been acting professionally. So you shouldn't knock him. But there's this within the GOP, there's this struggle about, do you track this stuff all the way up to trying to take shots at Mueller, which some people definitely are, or do you try to separate out Mueller's integrity from the integrity of the many dozens of other people that have been involved in touching this probe? And that's the conflict right now, and it's clear which side of that line the President's on.
And Jeff, back to the point, to the moment that sometimes gets lost, the President spent hours yesterday meeting with his legal team. They have to make a decision, and I'm told Mueller wants an answer relatively soon about, are you going to come in for an interview voluntarily? Do I have to then consider a subpoena if you won't? And all the other dominoes of how the investigation. So as the President launches these attacks, number one, he had the IG report. Number two, he spent time with his attorneys. Now, the President has to consider this, the hardball tactics of the special counsel who just sent his former campaign chairman back to jail.
I mean, I'd like to see the President walk on the North Lawn this afternoon and talk about Paul Manafort again. He has disavowed him so many times, did so again this morning, not involved in my campaign, barely involved in my campaign. The reality is, and we should remember, that without Paul Manafort, he likely would not have become the nominee, or would have been much more difficult at the Republican convention, as we remember from the time, because he was in charge of the delegates. But the President clearly, I thought this morning, was perhaps trying to hijack the news cycle. He knew that Paul Manafort was going to be in the courtroom. There's many other things going on here. So I think that going forward, the President does have a decision to make, and we still don't know what he's going to do. He is trying to discredit this entire matter, but he still wants to sit down and talk. He's talked more in the last week at that long news conference in Singapore. This morning, it seems like he has a lot he wants to say. We'll see if he says anything to Bob Mueller.
And to that point, Shimon Prokopez is still with us. Shimon, again, if you're a Trump supporter, you're going to say none of these charges have anything to do with 2016. None of these charges have anything to do with Russian collusion, with obstruction of justice. Other people say, if you understand Bob Mueller and you know how he builds a case, that this is a methodical building and that the arc is turning back toward that. What do our sources tell us?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, John. We don't know what exactly the special counsel and Robert Mueller are up to. We don't have a complete picture, but we have indications that there is something, as I said earlier, that Paul Manafort, there's some piece of information, certainly by people we've talked to, that indicates to us, that they want his cooperation. You're right. I mean, people close to the President himself have argued, they've gone 12 years back, and to bring these charges and things he didn't do while he was part of the campaign, campaign. This has nothing to do with the campaign. That's absolutely right. However, we know that the Department of Justice, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who's overseeing the Russia investigation, told the special counsel, gave them permission to go ahead and investigate these alleged crimes. So something is going on here. We just don't know fully what's going on, what the full picture is. But the one good point that has been made is that this is sort of building up to something. What that is yet to be determined.
And we should always note, as I do, it's like a broken record, the president knows more than we do. And so when you try to put this into context, yes, these charges are about things that happened well before the campaign. But when the president hired Paul Manafort, just do an internet search, it was no secret that he did business for pro-Kremlin politicians in Ukraine. It was no secret that he had contacts inside Russia. During the campaign, he was at that infamous meeting arranged by Donald Trump Jr. with the Russians who promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. The president says there's no collusion. There was certainly communication between people in the campaign, including Paul Manafort and Russians throughout the election year. Dozens of such contacts. And yet, to your point, Jeff, this is the president of the United States this morning saying, Paul who?
Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign. But I feel I feel a little badly about it. They went back 12 years to get things that he did 12 years ago. You know, Paul Manafort worked for me for a very short period of time.
A very short period of time. Perhaps you could argue that, but a very critical period of time, at a time when people thought there'd be a contested convention, at a time right after that, coming out of it, trying to build momentum after that, brought Mr. Gates into the campaign, your former client. He was a much bigger player than the president wants you to believe.
Yeah, look, as somebody who was on covering the campaign, I feel a little bit like I'm taking crazy pills, given how often I had to interact with Paul Manafort for the 49, 50-day period, how often he was on television, how often he was representing the president. But I think more importantly, behind the scenes, he was crucial. He was crucial in steadying the ship. If you remember what the campaign was going through when Paul Manafort was brought on, perhaps most importantly, Jeff alluded to this, you did as well, at the convention, people, I think, somehow forget going into the convention, there were very real questions about whether the president would get the delegates, how the operation would work. Paul Manafort helped orchestrate what turned out to be a very, very impressive, methodical, and effective operation to ensure that any threat that the president had on the delegate side of things just fell by the wayside. And again, we talked to him constantly. He was the face of the campaign for a legitimate period of time, however long it may have been. So this idea that he wasn't involved in any way, shape, or form, or was coffee boyish to talk about another individual who's been wrapped up in this, it's just wrong, and they know that.
It's beyond wrong. It's ludicrous and in some cases laughable. We'll continue to cover this one. Again, Paul Manafort on his way to jail now because accused of witness tampering in his case out of the special counsel investigation. When we come back, more on the president's morning at the White House. Call it freestyling. Parts of it also fact-free. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It was a beyond remarkable morning at the White House. President Trump freestyling, confident, contentious, often divorced from the facts and the truth as he held court with reporters. The topics ranging from the Russia meddling investigation to China trade and his administration's decision to separate children from their illegal immigrant parents at the U.S.-Mexico border. The president's number one talking point on a morning where he talked a lot was this.
I did nothing wrong. There was no collusion. There was no obstruction. The IG report yesterday went a long way to show that. If you read the IG report, I've been totally exonerated. Take a look at the investigation. Take a look at how it started. Take a look at the horrible statements that Peter Strzok, the chief investigator, said. And take a look at what he did with Hillary Clinton.
I've been totally exonerated. That only is not true. It's laughable. The report in question, again, is the Justice Department Inspector General review of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. It does, as we talked a bit earlier, have some harsh findings about the FBI and some people within the FBI, but it addresses none of the substantive issues of the Russia meddling probe. Our Abby Phillip at the White House was part of that scrum on the North Lawn of the White House this morning. Abby, a remarkable moment. Take us inside.
Really an amazing moment, John, and one that most of the reporters here, if not all of them, had literally never seen before. A president walking out of the residents really coming up from the back way of the White House to come up the driveway, to come over here a few feet from where I'm standing right at this moment to talk to Fox News in an extended televised interview on the fly. A lot of the White House aides here this morning were telling us, don't hold your breath, he's not really going to come out. Minutes after they told us that, the president walked out of the White House. And he did it in a very relaxed fashion for the most part. He seemed very eager to take questions. Aides were waiting for him to wrap up after the Fox interview, but he stayed and he talked for another half an hour about a series of issues. And one of the biggest topics of contention during this time was the issue of North Korea and why the president uses the language that he does about Kim Jong-un now, specifically failing to criticize him for his human rights violations. At some point, I and other reporters were questioning him repeatedly about this. He says he doesn't know anything about that. He can't speak to the issue of human rights violations. And at one point, he grew so frustrated by a persistent reporter asking him about that issue that he called her obnoxious, told her to stop talking. This was really chaotic for a few moments there, but an extraordinary moment where the president really had a lot to get off his chest, and he certainly did, John.
Abby Phillip at the White House, appreciate your insights on that one. It was a remarkable scrub. I covered the building for 10 years, never saw a president do that one. BuzzFeed's Trini Party joins the conversation here. Let's play a little bit more of the chaos. Number one, you saw the pictures of the president walking out there. He was scheduled to do an interview. They say it was impromptu. He was scheduled to do an interview on Fox and Friends this morning, and then on the way out, you saw the scrum and reporters trying to get him questions. And then listen right here as he starts to get mic'd up with Steve Doocy.
Things are going fast here in Washington, just saying. But
you're having a lot of fun, right?
We're having.
So supposing Hillary got elected instead of Trump, do you think it would be so exciting?
He's having fun there, and the president certainly is due his fun. But I want to come back to the thing we started to talk a bit about earlier, is to consider the moment. He met with his attorneys yesterday. He started a trade war with China today. There's all this more, what we know and what we're told might happen about more staff turnover and turmoil inside of the White House. Is this the president being his advanced man communications director, spokesman, chief of staff, all at once?
That's exactly right. I mean, the president hasn't really had any major public events since getting back from Singapore. So this, I think, is what he saw as his moment to come out and air all of his frustrations, really try to manage what people have seen as a very chaotic time period with the Russia investigation, with North Korea. There's so much going on that he wanted to get out there and get his message out directly. And
amen. It's great to be able to talk to the president, to hear from the president, to ask questions of the president. It would be nice, though, if when the president answered, he stuck to the facts, or at least reasonable political interpretations of the facts. Here he is talking about, this is in the Fox interview, talking about what the IG report yesterday, his view of the IG report, and it does cast, without a doubt, a lot of harsh judgments about James Comey, the former FBI director. A lot of harsh judgments. It does not do this.
Should James Comey be locked up?
Well, look, I would never want to get involved in that. Certainly, they just seem like very criminal acts to me. What he did was criminal. Should he be locked up? Let somebody make a determination. I think Comey was the ringleader of this whole, den of thieves. It was a den of thieves.
The President of the United States saying the FBI is a den of thieves. Perhaps the most respected law enforcement agency in the world is a den of thieves. Comey is guilty of criminal acts, he says repeatedly. If you read the IG report done by a very respected Inspector General, it says Comey made some monumental, galactical bad judgments. It also says that they found no evidence of any political bias in making those judgments, that he just made bad calls. It's not what the president said.
Look, I think the president's comments are more than anything a window, yet another one, into his mindset and about the way he views these things. Comey was knocked in that IG report for being insubordinate, for going by the beat of his own drum, for, basically, as you said, exhibiting extraordinarily bad judgment. And the others in the FBI were knocked for bias against, or displaying bias against President Trump. So those are like the two most evil things that you can do in the president's world. He is used to people giving him loyalty up the chain, not so much down, as we've seen. And he doesn't like it when people aren't in his corner. So in his world, yeah, that's, emotionally criminal perhaps, even though clearly he's prone to hyperbole. And this may also be an example of one of the reasons why his lawyers are worried about him talking to Bob Mueller. He cannot stick to the facts of what is blatantly clear in black and white to the rest of the world now because they've published that report. less than 24 hours later, he goes and spins like this. What about things that people can't truth squad him on quite that easily that he might do? Mueller's going to have a lot less mercy, I think, than the viewing audience of Fox and Friends.
And something else, again, the president could have said, look how harsh that report was on James Comey. If I were Bob Mueller, I wouldn't trust him. I wouldn't trust his judgment. I wouldn't trust record. That's fair. You could say that, and it would be fair. Instead, you say criminal acts, den of thieves. Another thing where the president, again, wanders far from the truth here. This is completely unrelated. But the administration right now is also facing some heat, even from fellow conservatives, saying, why are we separating children from their parents when those parents, understandably, are breaking the law when they cross the border? The administration has every right to stop them under the law. The question is, why do you separate the children from their parents while they're being held? Here's the President of the United States. His Attorney General made this decision. His Justice Department is enforcing this policy. Here's how the President describes it.
He's following laws, very simply, that were given to us and forced upon us by the Democrats.
But there's no law that
true,
says
sir.
organs have to be separated at the border.
The
There's another
Democrats
way to go
gave
about it,
us
Mr.
the
President.
laws. Now, I want the laws to be beautiful, humane, but strong. I don't want bad people coming in. I don't want drugs coming in. And we can solve that problem in one meeting. Tell the Democrats, your friends, to call me.
Can I ask
It's not true. It's factually inaccurate. It's a lie. It's whatever you want to call it. And it's been repeated at the White House podium as well. I don't understand it, why they don't communicate with the Attorney General, who made very clear that this was a policy that they were pursuing on their own grounds to disincentivize individuals from coming. His point was, if you don't want to be separated from your child, don't cross the border. If you talk to Republicans who kind of have a grasp of what the administration is trying to do here, it's a dual-pronged approach. The first one that the Attorney General laid out, and also to try and force Democrats to the table in a negotiation for a broader immigration package. What it is not is something that they were forced to do. And to be blunt, as somebody who's been on the Hill and covered the immigration process over the course of the last 15, 16 months, all this does is move them significantly further away to any possibility of trying to find a resolution on DACA.
As I said, we'd love to hear from the president. It'd be nice if most of what he said was fact-based. Most. Reasonable aspiration. Up next for us here, the White House hits China with massive new trade tariffs as China promises to retaliate ASAP. Detail of just what happened inside the federal courtroom today when Judge Amy Berman Jackson decided to send the former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort to jail because of allegations of witness tampering. The judge looking directly at Paul Manafort and telling him, quote, the harm in this case is harm to the administration of justice and harm to the integrity of the court system. This is not middle school. I can't take away his cell phone. I thought about this long and hard, Mr. Manafort. I have no appetite for this. Judge Jackson also acknowledging the debate about the whole case, saying this hearing is not about politics, is not about the conduct of the office of the special counsel. So that stern warning from the judge as she sent Paul Manafort to jail. We'll keep track of that case. Some other big news today. President Trump today slapping $50 billion in new tariffs on Chinese imports. China immediately called it a trade war and immediately announced it will retaliate. Financial markets also reacting. Take a look right there. The market's down nearly 220 points as we go through the day. That in reaction to this talk of a trade war, the reality now of a trade war. CNN's chief business correspondent Christine Romans explains the fine print.
John, the president this morning on his trade agenda saying the U.S. isn't the one who started a trade war.
The trade war was started many years ago by them, and the United States lost.
So you're saying we're on the losing end of it?
Well, no, there is no trade war. They've taken so much. So last year, $375 billion in trade deficit. We had a 300 with China. We had overall over $800 billion over a period of years. Each year, close to $800 billion in losses on trade. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen.
So the China tariffs are back on. The president says trade with China is unfair. The situation no longer sustainable. And he's targeting technology that China has vowed to dominate. Xi Jinping's Made in China 2025 initiative. There'll be a 25% tariff on 1,100 or so product categories, what the U.S. calls industrially significant technologies like aerospace equipment, tech, manufacturing, medical supplies. U.S. companies pay the price. They pay the tariff to the U.S. government when they import these goods. Companies can either absorb the higher cost or pass it along to consumers. Quick reaction from the Chinese Commerce Ministry, which said the U.S. kept changing its mind and has now decided to launch a trade war. The tariff tiff has been on and off. They're right there. The White House first unveiled this list in March, multiple rounds of trade talks with China, a tariff ceasefire in May, Then that recent summit with North Korea, seen by many as a big win for China, but today $50 billion in tariffs anyway. The Chinese vow retaliation. The White House vows more tariffs if China targets farmers or hurts American companies in China. The U.S. move is punishment, we're told, for China stealing trade secrets, for forced technology transfers from American companies, for cyber theft. And it fulfills Trump's pledge to cut the trade deficit, or at least to try. John?
Christine Romans, thanks for breaking down the numbers. It's a remarkable moment. On the one hand, this is the issue on which President Trump, candidate Trump, businessman Trump, private citizen Trump has been the most consistent over 25 years or more. He thinks that trade practices are unfair against the United States, and he's promised to do something about it. On the other hand, a lot of Republicans, especially in this election year, get really nervous about this. Say, Mr. President, we got below 4% unemployment. The tax cuts are kicking in. Economic growth is good. We have an economic story we can sell in a very tough political climate. I want you to listen here. This is Gary Cohn, the president's former top economic advisor. He left the White House in part because of his differences with the president on the issue of trade, saying, Mr. President, you might regret this.
If you end up with a tariff battle, you will end up with price inflation. You could end up with more consumer debt. Those are all historic ingredients for an economic slowdown.
Could it wipe out the benefits of the tax bill?
Yes, it could.
And yet the president, he's been told that, and yet he wants to do it anyway. He believes in this. Why?
He does believe in this, largely because of the advisors who essentially won the argument, and the advisors who are still there. That is a former chief economic advisor. It is, as you said, one of the central reasons that Gary Cohn is not there anymore. He's listening to the protectionist viewpoint here, and the president is basically saying, that I'm friends with President Xi. This will work out, but we have to do this. It's unclear if he fully understands the potential implications on this in red states, in Trump states, to Trump voters here. The economy is not going to be humming along forever. Long-term forecasts, say that inflation is coming, and this could lead to that. So I think it's very, it's a moment for him, and we're not sure how this will end. It's not going to be good.
To that point, number one, a map. It's not just China. We have the aluminum tariffs. Right. We have Canada, Mexico, the European Union, China now subject to a trade war, tariff battle, call it what you will. This is Heath Hauk, a soybean farmer in Illinois, to CNBC. I'm nervous to think about the scenarios of what's going to happen if it does go into effect. In the last 3 to 5 years, with the depressed farming economy the way it is, it can certainly hamper us even further. Kind of scares me, to be honest. This is Gary Hartman. Listen here. A business owner who voted for Trump in part because of his economic promises, now nervous.
He sold us on, I'm going to help you with that trade issue. And people remember it. People in this factory remember it. If we can't do something, whether it's this tariff or if it's something else, to help us have a fair playing field and level field with China, I'm not sure people are going to buy into it in 4 years.
Taking a risk.
No question. I think the interesting element, probably underappreciated, is how Republican senators, many of whom are up, or some of whom are up for re-election, have been freaking out about this for months behind the scenes. They've had multiple policy lunches about this. They've gone to the White House and raised this. I think the biggest issue more broadly that I hear on Capitol Hill, at least, they want to know what the strategy is. Is this part of a broader effort right now? Is there some end game here that the White House has mapped out? They have not been told one. They have moments where they think, maybe this is crazy enough to work, but they have more moments where they hear from their constituents. Ideologically, they're opposed to many of these ideas, and they are very uncomfortable with where things are. That said, at this point, they're not going to do anything to stop it.
At this point, they know he's going to go forward with it. All right, we'll keep an eye on the markets as well today. When we come back, lots of talk about more senior officials leaving the White House. The president weighs in